I got to get out of here. Oh, okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you on this wonderful, wonderful day. I've been in Washington at the Congressional Black Caucus weekend hearing the issues discussed by the Congressional Black Caucus. It's, my goodness, they were founded in 1969. It was not even 20 of them. Now there's 62 African Americans serving in both houses of Congress. Amazing, amazing accomplishment and tremendous issues that were being discussed here about everything. And so I just had Mayor Brandon Johnson from Chicago on the Keep Hope Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson radio show, my other job. And it's very interesting hearing all the other things that he is doing that are lowering crime, right? Reopening mental health centers, funding violence interrupters. He saw a precipitous drop in crime as he provided youth with jobs this past summer. And on and on and on. We're not hearing that side. We're not hearing that side. And I thought it was important to let him speak as we're seeing this tremendous push against progress. I'm not going to even say progressives, against progress. Americans are not who we were in 1950. We're not who we were in 1850 or 1750. We've just continued to move forward. And yet there are forces that really want to continue to push us back. But you do know, at the founding of the Republic, there was a significant group of Americans who were still loyal to the Queen, including Benjamin Franklin, whose son remained loyal to the Queen. He was her representative as the governor of New Jersey. Think about that. So he became an American, Benjamin Franklin did, late in his life. He evolved into that. And I think Americans are evolving into being Americans. Let's give us time. But we've got a lot of things to do, So I want to talk with you today. I want to talk with this young man is so brilliant, and he's got a new book that is coming out, and I cannot wait. The Imperial Bureau, the FBI, political surveillance, and the rise of the U.S. national security state. Oh, killing me softly with his song. It's the story of my life and all the people I know. Of course, the policy director for defending rights of dissent, Chip Gibbons. Welcome back to the show, looking like a true Anglophile today. I love this hat.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes.
The presentation. We've seen Jimmy Kimmel come back on the air. We've seen Nexstar and Sinclair. Really, Sinclair is renowned for being quite conservative in their politics.
Oh, yes.
But $4 billion was lost by Disney. So they had to make a business decision. And I'm sure a lot of things went into that. Anytime this decision was assailed by people on the right as well as the left, something is going on in America. In the meantime, at the same time, shall I say, we've got these executive orders that the president continues to sign. And, Chip, when you lose a right, it's very hard to get it back.
Extremely.
So help me to understand what is happening under this administration. When you have Stephen Miller, who's a deputy chief of staff at the White House, who's saying that we're going to go after the left. We're going after them. What does all of that mean?
Well, I just have to start by specifying my book will be out in a year. Every time I do one of these interviews, people ask me when is the book coming out.
I'm waiting.
You got another year. It'll be September 2026, hopefully. All things go well. which hopefully they will. Yeah, so the Trump administration, I don't think it's a secret to listeners of this program, is particularly hostile to dissent, right? They're not into free expression, even though they made that a cornerstone of their electoral campaign. Donald Trump does not like people who disagree with him, and he's become sort of a leader of a segment of the far right that is deeply interested in, as you've mentioned, bringing America back, I think probably to 1950, maybe 1850. I guess we'll see. And they are very much interested in using political repression to get their way. 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, Charlie Kirk was murdered. It was a horrible tragedy. Obviously, we should not be killing each other because of their opinions or disagreements. But Stephen Miller and others in the Trump administration have really jumped on this in order to push this pre-existing agenda that is demonizing Americans who don't agree with them. They're claiming that, people who criticized Mr. Kirk, and many people did, his views were quite polarizing, to be very, putting it softly, very polarizing views, putting it mildly. As sort of responsible for his death, and claiming that there is this network of left-wing violence. Of course, we've seen political violence in this country in the assassinations of the state assembly leader in Minnesota and elsewhere. So it's not really like there's a tidal wave of left-wing assassinations, but we are seeing these incidents where there are sort of young men with sort of unclear views that are very sort of nihilistic backgrounds in terms of online posting, that have carried out these high-profile acts. First, the Kirk assassination, then the shooting at the ICE facility. And the Trump administration is using that to broadly paint everyone who disagrees with them as a domestic terrorist. And last week, they put forward an executive order declaring Antifa a domestic terrorist organization. And then they accompanied that with a explainer on the White House website about how Trump is going to crush left-wing political violence, and then following up with a national security memo that I believe came out on Thursday. It was the same day as James Comey's indictment. You had this terrifying memo, and then a few hours later it was lost in the news cycle to the Comey indictment, which is not to say that's not an important story. It's just there are many important stories right now, and it's hard to keep track of all of them. And that really laid out a blueprint for going after the left, particularly using the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, using various bodies dedicated to policing funding for terrorism, a lot of language about radicalization, which I can get to in a minute as to why that's disturbing. And I think it's worth taking a step back and saying, what does this do and what doesn't it do? A lot of people might know there are laws against quote unquote material support for terrorism, and they're wondering, does this designation invoke those laws? And the answer is no. There is no designation under US law for quote unquote domestic terrorist organizations. There are two terrorist designations that are important. One is the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation, which is found in the Immigration and Nationality Act. That was put there by a horrible law with an even grosser name, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996. And that allows the Secretary of State to basically blacklist foreign groups, and it makes it a crime to material support them. Material support in this context includes the provision of services, which has been interpreted by the federal government to include quote unquote coordinated advocacy. In addition to the Foreign Terrorist Organization designation, there is a law called the International Emergency Powers Act. I don't believe it references terrorism, but since the Clinton administration, presidents have used that law to sanction individuals and groups as specially designated global terrorists. The first American ever sanctioned under that law was either a resident of Chicago or a Chicago suburb, Mohammed Salah. He had been tortured by the Israelis. It's a very ugly affair. And that law functions very similarly to the material support provision. You can provide services. But both of those laws require some sort of nexus to an international movement or international entity, international terrorism, threat to national security, in order to be invoked. The domestic terrorism organization thing is just something Trump has completely made up. In addition to the material support for a foreign terrorist organization law, there is a second, older material support for terrorism statute, and that makes it a crime to engage in material support for a federally designated act of terrorism. There's 90 or 80 some laws that they consider to be acts of terrorism. They can include everything from hijacking a plane, which, like, obviously that would be an act of terrorism, but also computer intrusion, which is not something we think of as a terrorist act. But that doesn't require the party that the support allegedly goes to be designated by the executive branch. That just requires you to support a violation of one of these other statutes. So nothing new has been criminalized here that wasn't already criminalized. So should we be concerned with these executive orders? And the answer is yes, we should be absolutely terrified. Not terrorized, terrified. And the reason why is that, Trump's executive order calls Antifa, and it must be stressed, there is no organization called Antifa. Antifa is short.
What is Antifa? Yeah.
It is short for anti-fascist. It refers to a viewpoint. Many people adopt that label for themselves, including a lot of anarchist groups. But the right wing has for 150 years believed that every sort of protest or act, a movement for justice, has been sort of puppets of some sort of sinister international strategy. When Hoover was first appointed to head the FBI's intelligence division under Wilson, they want to know if things like the Red Summer in Chicago, where African Americans were standing up to racial violence, was the work of IWW, Industrial Workers of the World propaganda. Of course, when he spied on King, the belief was that the Communist Party was controlling everything. So in certain sectors of the right today, Antifa functions the way the Communist Party or the IWW did in Hoover's day. The difference is that, there was a Communist Party. They weren't controlling everything in the world, but they existed, whereas Antifa is just completely a phantom that has been concocted by a lot of right-wing commentators. But what it describes Antifa as in the executive order is it says that they are an anarchist enterprise. And that might sound like a lot of bluster, but the FBI conducts three types of investigations: predicated investigations, assessment, and enterprise investigations. When it conducts terrorism, domestic terrorism investigations, whether they're terrorist enterprise investigations, which are investigations to a group of two or more, so remember that, it divides them internally by persistent extremist movement. One of the persistent extremist movements the FBI tracks are so-called anarchist extremists. So a colleague of mine at the Cato Institute, ironically, Pat Eddington, got a copy of the FBI's investigative designations for 2019. It shows a designation: terrorist enterprise investigation, anarchist extremist. So the FBI literally has a type of investigative designation that says terrorist enterprise, anarchist extremist, and the president of the United States has just said Antifa is a anarchist enterprise.
Well, let me ask you this:
Sure.
Since it's an anarchist enterprise, can that come from the right as well as the left?
So that's a very interesting question. The FBI defines an anarchist extremist as someone who is opposed to capitalism, globalization, racial, social, and political hierarchy. So if you found someone on the right who does not like capitalism, globalization, or racial hierarchy, in theory it could, but it's very much a designation the FBI uses to denote left-wing protest movements.
Yeah, but when globalization is like something that is overarching, and you hear that on the right and the left. You had the DOJ that pulled this report that said, hey, most of our domestic terrorists really come from the right. They pulled it the day after Charlie Kirk was murdered.
And outwardly, during the first Trump administration, the FBI got into trouble because people found out they had a designation on Black identity extremism. So what they did with their public-facing designations is they put together unlike groups into sort of public-facing categories. So the FBI, when it reports data to Congress, talks about racially motivated violent extremists, and this includes both quote-unquote Black extremists who are motivated by, this is FBI language, not mine, perceptions of racial injustice. and white supremacist. It also includes anti-authority, anti-government extremist, which includes anarchist. When the FBI uses that phrase, but not DHS, it includes Puerto Rican independence extremists. The FBI is still hunting Puerto Rican independence extremists after all these years. Sovereign citizens, which is traditionally a right-wing movement, but the FBI has argued that various Black separatist movements could be regarded as sovereign citizens, and militia extremists. So what the FBI has done publicly is it has internal categories for the left and internal categories for the right that it uses, but its public reporting, it's morphed them all together. So you don't have data that goes to Congress on how many white supremacist investigations there are, but you do hear how many racially motivated violent extremists you're looking into. And the impact of that is the FBI could be opening up lots of frivolous investigations into Black Lives Matter, into racial justice protesters, and we could have a string of attacks from white supremacists, and someone in Congress could say, what are you doing about that? And then Kash Patel could say, oh, we have all these racially motivated violent extremism investigations open, not mentioning that those investigations are into the racial justice protesters. Barr, during Trump's first term, did this. In response to the George Floyd protest, he created an anti-authority extremism task force, and he said the anti-authority extremism task force or working group is going after both the left and the right. The left-wing group he named was Antifa, again, not a group. And then the right-wing group he named were the Boogaloo Boys, which is not a movement I'm capable of explaining in any coherency. They wear like Hawaiian shirts, and they took their name from an internet meme that's about a movie. A lot going on there that is outside. My expertise is on the FBI. It's not on people's sort of adaptation of internet memes in their political militias.
Well, because it's getting confusing. And I say that because I'm beginning to see people on the right and the left agree on some issues, right? And I'm wondering where the intelligence community will go with that.
That's a very good question. It is very interesting. You have a lot of hostility towards the FBI on some parts of the right because of the Trump-Russia investigation, where the FBI's conduct was reviewed by the Inspector General and it was not on the up and up. But that's in large part because the FBI is just not on the up and up, as well as a lot of anger about people being prosecuted for storming the Capitol on January the 6th. And that has led to a lot of right-wing hostility against the FBI. And sometimes they do sound like they're making civil liberties arguments. Sometimes they don't. It is worth pointing out that I feel like there are a number of figures who have been very critical of the Trump-Russia investigation who are elated about Trump going after the left. So there are principled people on the right, a few of them like Thomas Massie, I think is a great example of this, but there's also a lot of people who still have a lot of double standards. And you see this with this Stephen Miller, who is running around saying the Democrats are a domestic terrorist organization and he's going to smash them and crush them and do all these awful things. And then Gavin Newsom tweeted out that Stephen Miller is a fascist, and they're all treating that as incitement to violence, right? If you call Stephen Miller a fascist, that's incitement to violence. If Stephen Miller says you're a domestic terrorist who's threatening the country and he's going to smash you, that's somehow not incitement to violence. So there's a lot of double standards in Washington today.
So where are we in this fight? Because you do have some of the most powerful people in federal government who are stating, look, and they have executive orders to this effect, that they are going after said groups, even though the evidence is showing. And I told you, I mean, I don't have to tell you the evidence is there. The DOJ had their own study that was pulled off the site the day after Charlie Kirk was killed. And it said that most of this domestic terrorism is emanating from the right. Look, everybody, Stephen Blursh, I'm not into terrorism. I don't care where it comes from. I'm from the nonviolent uh, portion of the civil rights movement and of social change. That's what I believe in. I think all of this is awful, but I think we're being gamed here, Chip. I guess that's my
Yeah.
point.
I mean, it's a really good point. And you go back, when I was writing my book, I found an FBI document from August 2001. We all know what happens in September 2001, and it's a terrorism document. And do you know what they thought the big terror threat was? Anarchist. And they cite the anarchists as a big terror threat for, I think, two reasons. One, they had already assassinated President McKinley, which President
Mhm.
McKinley was assassinated a very long time before August 2001. And also, they had had a watershed protest at the World Trade Organization, and domestic terrorism always or often follows watershed protest. And you have this sort of mentality amongst a lot of people that political protest produces terrorism. And this was the theory that after the Hoover programs are, I don't want to say dismantled, they were never really dismantled, but have restraints on them. There is a sort of 25-year project to revive them under the grounds of we need to prevent terrorism. And then when 9/11 happens, the sort of agenda of that project is adapted as sort of the post 9/11 strategy. The FBI agents in the current guidelines are told they cannot wait for information about terrorists to come in from other sources. They have to go out and proactively find them. The FBI's terrorism strategy is called a disruption strategy. This is, of course, the language of counterintelligence program. And FBI agents are told they have to use intelligence to prevent terrorism before it happens, not prosecuted after it occurs. And I think everybody wants to prevent violence before it happens. But if you're told you have to go out and prevent terrorism from anarchist extremists, you have to find the anarchist extremists before they act. And the definition of an anarchist extremist is you don't like capitalism, globalization, racial, social, political hierarchies. Then, who do you go and look for if you're acting preventatively? You look for someone with those views. And the FBI guidelines are set up to allow the FBI to investigate someone who they have no factual basis to believe they've committed a federal crime or threat to national security. And threatening national security is, of course, a much more nebulous concept than committing a federal crime. These investigations are called assessments. And at the assessment level, the FBI can put an informant in your group. They can go through your trash. They can do all of these things. And they do not need any factual predicate. That's the FBI term of art, predicate. That means they have evidence to believe you are going to break a law or that you threaten national security. And again, if you have FBI agents who are told, go find anarchist extremists, go find Antifa, and they can open these preventative investigations without any evidence of the individual engaging in wrongdoing, they're going to look at political speech. And the FBI guidelines say an assessment can't be opened entirely on political speech, just partially, but we know for a fact that this is what they do. And it's tailor-made, right? It is hardwired into this system. There is no situation in which you tell someone, go find potential anarchist extremists being left-wing protesters before they become terrorists and investigate them, where you don't go look at the left. And one of the really troubling things the FBI has embraced over the last 20 years, 21 years, no one questioned my math here, has been something called radicalization theory. And that this is this idea that there is a conveyor belt from political or religious activity. It's originally applied very heavily to the Muslim community and becoming a violent extremist, and that the FBI can note indicators of radicalization and intervene at that point. And in Trump's, I don't know if it's the executive order or the National Security Memorandum, he repeatedly talks about going out and getting individuals who are radicalizing other individuals and recruiting them. So this is a long-term problematic theory the FBI has embraced, the NYPD has embraced it as well, and it was very heavily used to target the Muslim community. And what we start to see is it has been expanding beyond Muslims into what the FBI calls the sort of persistent violent extremist movements. The FBI actually created a computer game for children called Don't Be a Puppet. It's a horrible game. I think it's off the internet, but it was, I mean, not even just politically, it was just a very poorly designed game. It's what happens when, you know, middle-aged FBI agents design video games for school children. And the original version of it was all about inciting young people to sort of spy on and turn their Muslim friends. And the FBI got huge backlash from the Muslim community about it. So they redid the game to include animal rights activists, anarchists, militias, etc. And then one of the activities of suspicious activity you should support was a friend posting on Facebook, this lab is testing on animals. We're going to go show them what we think of them. So basically it moved from viewing people who are Muslim as suspicious to viewing anybody who's a political activist as suspicious. And it really is the underlying belief system that animates this so-called preventative framework. And that is very much hardwired into it, because as soon as you had the investigations by the Senate into counterintelligence program, into the spying on King in the 70s, the so-called Church Committee, you have a movement of people in the Republican caucus. Then obviously now there are people in the Republican caucus who are surprisingly very good on these issues, and the Heritage Foundation and in these other sort of right-wing networks that was really pushing, we have to bring back the Hoover era programs in order to prevent terrorism, and that political movements produce terrorists. Therefore, we have to spy on these movements before they become terrorist. And of course, the movements they want to spy on are the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. You know, it's never, you know, the Stop the Steal movement.
Well, before you go, you see, because coming out of the civil rights movement, the informants have always been the most violent. They've been the provocateurs. They've been the ones who have wanted you to break the law.
Yes.
And that's what was always so obvious about them. You would always have to look sideways. And even Michael Moore had that in one of his movies, that, you know, they were, you know, these peace activists, you know, peace and love. They're just sitting around almost, you know, beating their little bongos, you know, having,
I remember
you know,
this day, they're eating cookies.
You saw that?
The one cooked 2 cookies.
Yeah, I mean, and it looked out the most radicalizing person in the group was a policeman who was from intelligence. He was an officer who was sent to break up their movement, and they found him out because he had been killed in the line of duty. I mean, just make this make sense for me. I mean, it's like we haven't moved.
You are absolutely correct. There is a long history of the use of infiltrators as agent provocateurs, going all the way back to the Pinkertons in the 1800s, and especially during the civil rights movement. In the last 20 years, the use of agent provocateurs has become the FBI's main domestic terrorism strategy. They would send people into mosque, originally it was mosque, and they would try to get them to commit acts of terrorism. There was one incident in Orange County where the mosque reported the FBI informant to the FBI. Right, he's wandering all around. He's like, what would the Imam say if I wanted to blow myself up? And I said, well, he'd say you were crazy, go away. Is there anybody else who might be more receptive? And they call the FBI, and the guy's an FBI informant. But you also see a number of cases with people who are very impoverished, oftentimes have pre-existing mental illness and a number of other factors, and they go for this. There's a horrible case in Newburgh, New Jersey, where there were these 4 men. The FBI informant came back. The one had said all these supporting for terrorism, desire to do violent statements. The FBI then gets him to go record him. None of the statements he can get him to say in the recording, the clandestine recording. And then they keep poking at him. And eventually they come back and they offer him money. They offer him BMWs. They offer him this. And he still says no. And then he loses his job at Walmart. And he comes back to it. And this is your big counterterrorism investigation. You spend years harassing this random man who is a bit of a blowhard, to be honest, but, not hurting anyone, trying to get him to agree to a terrorist plot that doesn't exist. When he won't do it for ideological reasons, you offer him increasingly more and more financial incentives, and people out here are hurting, right? And he gets laid off from Walmart. I'm not safer because of that. You're not safer because of that. And you see the FBI then employed that strategy around Occupy Cleveland, where they found a number of, again, the FBI informant was at Occupy Cleveland because he heard anarchist might be there, this sort of catch-all term that justifies surveillance. And he found a group of people who were, again, sort of blowhards, and sort of was able to coax them into agreeing to a terrorist plot. So never existed. So this has been a major strategy of the FBI in the last 20 some years. And I would suspect it's going to be very much a part of the sort of crackdown on Antifa, because it is just so hardwired to what they do. Or you had another FBI agent, I think it was during the George Floyd protest, ask someone to sell him or give him guns, and then because he was a felon, he arrested that person was arrested for giving guns to a felon. Right? They love the gun charges. That's one of the FBI. That is one of the FBI's like written strategies, is to use laws about felons possessing firearms or having access to firearms to disrupt what they call black extremists and preemptively prosecute them for them terrorist. So, I mean, if someone comes up to you and wants to talk to you about guns and violence, first of all, from a moral perspective, you should say no to that person. I'm with you. I'm on the nonviolent side. But you should be really strongly concerned that person is from the FBI. I mean, people have reported FBI informants to the FBI. I mean, imagine.
And it's 2025, and we're still talking about this. Not 1965, not 1975, not 1985, 95, 2005, 2015, 2025. The playbook has not changed. It has not changed. What do you want us to know before you go? Because indeed, I can't believe I'm going to have to wait a year for your book, but I will wait for a year.
You've waited 4 years already. What's one more?
Because I just want to hear. I want to hear. But I mean,
think we
what should we be looking out for?
We have to get really serious about disbanding the powers of the national security state. That is the mistake we always make. They're left in place, or they're expanded, or they're legitimized. And the national security state is a wonderful tool for a skilled authoritarian to wage war against democracy. And if you are afraid of a Donald Trump, or if you're on the right and you're afraid of a Barack Obama or whoever else, you should be concerned that any president could have these powers that have amassed over the last 100 years, and you should actually work to get rid of them. I mean, after the Bush administration, I think we had a real opportunity to go in and rein a lot of these things back. But unfortunately, Barack Obama made legitimizing those policies a huge part of his presidency. He increased the use of FBI informants. He increased the use of agent provocateurs. He doubled down on radicalization theory. He even killed a U.S. citizen with a drone strike. And we cannot have a situation where both sides are legitimating these powers and expanding them. No one wants to get them up, right? You have someone like a Barack Obama. I don't mean to pick on him, but, he was the president. When he was in the Senate, he was against the Patriot Act. When he was the president, he helped make that part of a permanent part of our life. We've got to actually disband this, right? You cannot say you're on the left, or you're a liberal, or you're a moderate, or anything else, and you are concerned with Trump as an authoritarian, but you're not doing anything about the fact that the FBI is allowed to investigate Americans who it does not suspect of crimes or threatening national security, or that they can go through your trash or put informants and have the informants try to find Walmart employees who are laid off and get them to agree to engage in fake terror plots for money. We have to actually go for this and dismantle.
Chip Gibbons, Policy Director for Defending Rights and Dissent. I could listen to you all day long. And I guess I'm just going to have to wait a year for the book, September 2026. But I cannot wait. I cannot wait, my friend. I cannot wait.
I think I'll be back before a year. I think you'll hear from me before a year.
I'm going to get you back on. If I can have you on tomorrow, I would.
I know that. Yes. Okay. All right. Well, safe travel.
Of course, Policy Director. Thank you so much. I'll see you when I come back to Washington, D.C.
Sounds good.
Sending you much love. I've got another member of the family here, and I can't believe he's actually in the United States, Chip Gibbons, Dr. Stephen Eunice. Oh my God, from University of San Francisco.
Hello, talking to you from San Francisco.
So I am
Great to be with you again.
I am glad that you, well, look, this is your bailiwick, politics and the Middle East. It is at the center of your work. So help me to understand what we saw with Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, I've got 20 minutes left and they all belong to you because I know he's spoken to rooms that have been emptied before, but it seemed different this time.
Yes, yes, it is. For one thing, he's an indicted war criminal. And
he had to take a circuitous route to get here, right? To fly.
Right. I mean, yeah, his plane, had to avoid flying over Europe. He had to go right along the Mediterranean and through the Straits of Gibraltar, and which is a pretty roundabout way given the circumpolar route that one would normally take from the Middle East to New York. But and the fact that the walkout was even more extensive than others. I mean, even countries that have traditionally been critical of Israel are willing to say, okay, this is the UN General Assembly, we should listen to everybody. But again, he's got the fact that he's an indicted war criminal, that he is supporting an act of genocide and running roughshod over decisions by the International Court of Justice, the UN Security Council. I mean, he really is a really notorious international outlaw. And the fact that the United States is virtually the only country that is supporting him like that. And meanwhile, the United States refused to allow the president of Palestine to address the United Nations.
That makes sense to me.
I mean, the United... Yeah,
yes.
I mean, but here, I mean, it's even more absurd than I think a lot of your listeners realize, because when the United States agreed to host the United Nations, we agreed that we would allow people to, no matter how nasty they were, how much we disagree with them, as heads of state, they would get to go and speak before the United Nations. We allowed Muammar Gaddafi in multiple times. We let Mahmoud Ahmadinejad in multiple times. We even let Yasser Arafat in back in 1974 when the PLO was still talking about destroying Israel and engaging in terrorism. But here we have Mahmoud Abbas, who's made peace with Israel, who is not Hamas, who has banned Hamas. He's banned Hamas from areas he controls. He is only asking for 22% of historic Palestine to be under the control of the Palestine Authority. I mean, he is the moderate in the equation. Hamas, of course, wants all of historic Palestine to be an Islamic state. Netanyahu wants it all to be a Jewish state. And here's a guy saying, hey, no, we'll let Israel have 78% of Palestine. We just want this 22%. Shared co-capital of Jerusalem, renouncing armed struggle, and Trump says, okay, you are the cause. This is you are the obstacle to peace, so we won't allow you to come and speak and make your plea for peace.
Well, see, and I'm wondering if we'll be able to hold on to the UN, because as we let Yasser Arafat and Gaddafi in, who in most of the world they're freedom fighters. I mean, that's how they've been viewed. And we let Begin in, who was a terrorist in his day. That even Queen Elizabeth said that. She said, wait a minute, because that is how she experienced Irgun and these people who were fighting to establish Israel. They were bombing the UK. Yeah. So help me to make this make sense for me, because I'm trying to figure out, I'm very quietly, I don't think people understand that a lot of people who work for the United Nations are leaving. They're going overseas. They're getting away from the United Nations because they're not letting the Palestinian Authority in. That's just a violation of what the United Nations is about, Dr. Yunus. And I'm trying to figure out how America.
They're very much so.
How do you hold on to how do you keep the United Nations here if you're not going to let people come in because they offend you? This country that's the host.
Exactly. Exactly. And in fact, just yesterday, the United States revoked the visa of President Petro of Colombia because of a speech he gave, after his UN speech at an anti-war rally. I mean, this is the United States really is becoming an outlaw superpower. And the crazy thing here is the isolation is even more confirmed by the fact that Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Australia, Canada, have all along with Belgium, Ireland, Sweden, Iceland, Luxembourg. I mean, the list goes on of European countries that figure, hey, we support a two-state solution, so why don't we recognize both states? It's only logical. And Trump and Netanyahu is, you're rewarding Hamas terrorism. But let's remember, Hamas has not been part of the Palestinian government since 2007. They are banned in areas controlled by the Palestine Authority. They're a rebel faction that forcibly seized power in Gaza 18 years ago. So again, this is not a reward for Hamas whatsoever. This is saying we want to honor a moderate Palestinian leadership. I mean, yes, the Palestinian Authority is pretty corrupt, and I mean, when you criticize certain aspects of those, like you can most governments in the world, but they are the moderates in the equation. The fact the United States wants to shut them down and wants to ban them from even speaking at the UN, who opposes our closest allies, recognizing them as a two-state solution, to recognize them as part of a two-state solution, is indicative that the U.S. is not just concerned about Hamas terrorism. The United States does not want the Palestinians to have their basic rights, period.
Why?
And this has been a long-standing policy. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, when the DNC met up in Minneapolis, there was a resolution put before the Rules Committee that basically had called on the United States to recognize Palestine alongside Israel. Now, polls show 78% of registered Democrats would support that. But the DNC Rules Committee shut it down, voted it down. There's also a resolution that basically said, let's suspend offensive military aid to Israel. Again, over 3/4 of Democrats polled support that. The DNC Rules Resolutions Committee voted it down. Instead, they passed a resolution that didn't mention anything about the arms. So the current, the policy from the 2024 platform remains in effect, namely that unconditional military aid to Israel remains ironclad. But they also, basically said that Palestinian statehood could only happen through direct bilateral negotiations between Israel and the Palestine Authority. Now, Israel has categorically ruled out any kind of Palestinian statehood. There has not been bilateral talks for at least 7 or 8 years, and the fact that given that the Democratic Party is also on record of not pressuring Israel through aid, through conditioning aid, and opposing the United Nations taking a role, for all intents and purposes, the Democratic Party opposes Palestinian statehood as well. I mean, they can say they support a two-state solution, but if their policies rule out any realistic way of that happening, let's not pretend the Democrats are any better on this.
But Dr. Zunas, I mean, and they know they lost the presidency on that point.
Yeah.
I mean,
exactly. Polls show the number. The what really made the difference was that there's a huge. I mean, Trump got a couple million votes more than he did 4 years ago, but the big difference, huge drop off. I think it was like 7-9 million votes. And people who went out for the Democratic Party in 2020 and not in 2024. The number one issue that for people, according to polls, was the Democratic Party support for Israel's war in Gaza. So yes, we would not be suffering under Trump right now if the Democratic Party had taken the principled position that aligned with the vast majority of their constituents.
But we'd be suffering under the Democrats because they wouldn't move. I mean, and that to me is very dangerous because, I mean, how does America's position, or how does the Middle East, how does Gaza impact the world? I mean, you have a profound understanding of domestic and international politics and, and the regional conflicts, but this is global. I mean, we saw, what was it, on Tuesday? The world walked out on Prime Minister Netanyahu, and it just felt different this time. How does this impact the world? Why is this so important?
Well, I think, despite all the contradictions, all the double standards, and all the things that people like you and I concerned about U.S. foreign policy have been talking about for decades, a lot of the world did look to the United States for leadership. I mean, we were among the founders of the United Nations. We were among the people who developed the International Treaty on Civil and Political Rights, the Fourth Geneva Convention. I mean, the United States, was very much part of building the post-World War II international legal order, which, despite its failings, did do some good work and prevent things from being even worse than they have been. And Biden was trying to assert this vis-a-vis Ukraine, saying that no country can expand its territory by force. No country can unilaterally change international boundaries. We need to defend the rules-based international legal order. But then when we go to Israel and saying, oh, they can annex the Golan Heights, they can annex Greater East Jerusalem, we can treat this illegal settlements as part of Israel proper. Israel can go and freaking commit genocide, and we'll support them. What does that do to U.S. credibility in the world? And when the largest, most powerful country refuses to respect the rules, with all the diplomatic, financial, and military things at our disposal, when we refuse to go by the rules, people think, why should anybody else? I mean, it's almost saying to terrorists or whatever, if even we can't go by the rules, even though we have this huge advantage in our resources, those people who are oppressed, and are desperate, again, why should we? But I think it's also important to underscore, Santita, that is, there are obviously things unique about Israel. Mm-hmm. But let's remember, this is not the only occupation we're supporting. We support Morocco's occupation of Western Sahara. We support Indonesia's occupation of East Timor. We support apartheid South Africa's occupation in Namibia. It's not our first genocide. Think of Guatemala in the early 80s, Bangladesh in 1971, East Timor. I mean, I think there's often a thing, especially among younger activists, who think, oh, this is unique. This is different. It's all because of AIPAC and the power of the Zionist lobby or whatever. But unfortunately, it is very much, this is part and parcel of U.S. imperialism, as we've seen. And yes, AIPAC and those folks kind of make it more difficult for us to change the policy. But the overall thrust of the policy, unfortunately, is not new. It's not unique.
Because AIPAC, they studied the system, they gamed the system. Mm-hmm. I don't like it, but that's what they've done. Big Pharma's gamed the system. I mean, they boxed out the family farmer. The system. Mm-hmm. And what did Elizabeth Warren say? The great senator from the great state of Massachusetts. She said the game is rigged. Everybody. So I mean, so let's be honest about this. Take me on the arc of history. I know I only have like 5 or 6 minutes here, but I talked to you all day too, and I'm going to call you back this week. But I want to know how we ended up here.
Okay. Think about if you look back at Vietnam, the majority of Americans came out against the war. Were against the war by 1967. We didn't pull out until 1973. Think about sanctions in South Africa. Yeah. Think about intervention in Central America. Think about the nuclear freeze and nuclear arms race. Think about Iraq. That all these struggles on foreign policy, there was, that the majority of Democrats, and indeed in many cases the majority of Americans overall, wanted to change these policies. But it took a few years. I mean, there's some courageous politicians like your father who took the leadership and being with the majority against the establishment. But it took a while. And I think I just want, in terms, I think it's important, as distressing and disturbing as things are now, to recognize that popular movements can change things. Even something as obscure as East Timor. Most people hadn't even heard of East Timor and the role the United States had in the slaughter of 1/3 of that island nation's population. But these church groups, these small human rights groups, and a few intellectuals like Ben Anderson, Noam Chomsky, and others, really, really pushed the issue and kept it alive. And so when the Indonesian economy tanked in 1999 and they needed to be bailed out, the United States, along with Britain, France, Australia, Canada, those who are supporting Indonesia, said, hey, we can't help. We'd like to bail you out. We'd like to help you, but this East Timor thing is making it politically impossible. And they allowed East Timor to be free. And you can look at all these other things. I mean, rationally, there's no reason to put sanctions in South Africa, because the combination of a poor black labor force and a wealthy white consumer class, the average return on investments was twice that of almost any other country. And yet civil society mobilized and forced governments to change. Because remember, Andrew Young, I love Andrew Young. I know Andrew Young. I assume you do as well. But as UN ambassador, he vetoed resolutions for sanctions in South Africa. And yet 8 years later, there was enough support in Congress, including the Republican-controlled Senate, to override Reagan's veto and impose sanctions, because a popular movement in those interim years on college campuses, labor unions, elsewhere, had risen up. And we can talk about, all these other examples that I gave, that people, as discouraging as things people are, that popular movements can change U.S. policy. And when you see the numbers, especially among young people right now, regarding Israel-Palestine, we are going to see change. We are going to see the U.S. finally saying to Israel, no. Trump himself said, I will not allow you to annex the West Bank. And the fact he said, I will not allow you, underscores we do have the power. The United States does have the power to stop Israel from doing these things. But our government needs to be pressured. And I really think we can do that. The question is, how many people are going to die in the interim?
Wow. How do we, just before you go, and, as you talked about Reverend Jackson, as you talked about Noam Chomsky and all these other people who have taken these tremendous stances, who put, their lives, their tenures, their livelihoods at risk. You've done the same thing. And I cannot ignore that. So my hat goes off to you as well. What is next? Because I feel like we're on the precipice of change, and people continue to move, no matter what the dominant or predominating argument is that's being pushed by corporate media. Americans are going this way. I mean, with Jimmy Kimmel, you've had people on the right and the left who said, this is a bridge too far. You have 3/4 of young Republicans who are saying, what we're doing in the Middle East is wrong. Everything is changing.
Yeah.
So what next?
I think people just keep doing what they're doing, and that everything from letter writing and calling Congress to protests, to teach-ins, to civil disobedience, to other forms of nonviolent resistance that we've seen before. But again, I think it's real. Personally, one can debate about Zionism. I mean, I don't consider myself a Zionist or whatever, but I think my advice would be, let's not go into the ideological arguments. Let's just talk about basic things like human rights, international law, the fact that you cannot kill 18,000 children, as Israel has in the past 2 years. You cannot, kill tens of thousands of other civilians using our weapons. Our government should not keep vetoing otherwise unanimous Security Council resolutions, as both Trump and Biden have done, to attempting to try to put an end to the slaughter. I mean, let's just go back to the basics about human rights, about international law, about human decency, about equality of peoples. I mean, this is the kind of thing that it's very hard for even the most right-wing politicians to argue against. And I think we have the real majority of the public behind us. And if we can just go back to these fundamentals and stress them over and over and over again, I think we will be a lot more powerful, again, than getting dragged down in various ideological arguments about things.
Professor Stevens Eunice from the University of San Francisco, I cannot wait to have you back, because I want you to take us on a historical journey. Because I think we need
one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah, no, I love it. And wait a minute, it's not going to cost us thousands of dollars. We're getting a college lecture. Oh my goodness. but I think it's important to understand how we got here. And because that will help to guide us out of this, or should I say through this. We're not going to get out of it. We got to go through it and learn the lessons that we need to be taught in this process. And I want to thank you for your work down through the years, and thank you for your newsletters, because I'm one of your Substack subscribers, and I love it, love it, love it. And I thank you so much for everything.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's always a blessing to have you. Everybody, I'm Santita Jackson, trying to get home to Chicago right now, and that's what I'm going to do here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, sending you all much love to you, Professor Eunice. God bless. Everybody have a great one.